She had no idea what was in my pocket. You ever watch someone so smug, so convinced they hold all the power, just crumble at the sight of a single piece of paper? That's what happened on Lake Silverpine one perfect Saturday afternoon. You see, the sun was high, the beer was cold, and the pontoon was humming along with the music we grew up on, Skinnerd, CCR, the kind of songs that smell like freedom and taste like summer. 25 of my closest friends, including my old college buddy Derek, had gathered for what we dubbed the unofficial kickoff to summer. An annual thing we did every June. No rules, no politics, just music, beer, and the lake. Until she showed up. Pamela Warwick, the HOA president of Crest Haven, rolled in like a suburban storm cloud with a spray helmet for hair and a voice that could strip paint off a boat hull. I swear, if the devil ran a neighborhood watch, she'd be his top lieutenant. And when she marched onto the sandy bank in those ridiculous heels, waving her phone like it was a badge, I knew what was coming. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" she screeched, her voice cutting through the music like a rusty saw. I didn't flinch. I just stared at her, calmly sipping my beer. Now look, I'm not some 20-something punk out here blasting trap music and making TikToks. I'm a 40-something software engineer who pays his mortgage, pays his taxes, and believes that when you live near a lake, you damn well better enjoy it. So when she shrieked about violating HOA Rule 17.3 and called the cops, I didn't panic. I've dealt with Pamela before. Hell, anyone in Crest Haven who's let their grass grow half an inch too long has dealt with Pamela. 15 minutes later, here comes Officer Nathan Powell, the poor bastard assigned to babysit her HOA power trips. I liked Nate. He had those tired eyes you only get from dealing with too many petty people and too little actual crime. When he stepped out of the cruiser and saw us laughing, grilling burgers, and tossing beers, he sighed like a man who just realized dinner was going to be cold again. "HOA calls again," he muttered under his breath as he walked up to my boat. "Ryan," he said, scratching the back of his neck, "I've got to shut it down. Write you a ticket. She's been on my boss's case for weeks." "She's out of her mind," Derek said beside me, his grip on the boat railing tightening. "We're not even near the houses. It's a damn lake. She says it's within HOA jurisdiction." Powell shrugged. "My boss golfs with her husband." I'm sorry. That's when it clicked. It wasn't just about the party. It was about control. Pamela had weaponized the HOA into her personal kingdom. A kingdom where kids were fined for biking too fast, where a tree branch hanging 6 inches over a line cost one woman $500. And now she was extending her invisible leash out onto public water. From the shore, she stood like a vulture in pearls, watching me like she'd already won. But I hadn't even reached into my jacket yet. Let me tell you something, if you're a man past 60, like many of you reading this, you know what it means when someone tries to tell you your freedom's inconvenient. You know what it feels like to have some self-appointed moral authority sneer at the simple pleasures you've worked hard your whole damn life to enjoy. I see you, Vietnam vets with your caps and your quiet stares. I see you, union guys who spent 30 years welding, lifting, paving, protecting. I see you, small business owners who know what it means to pay your employees first and yourself last. You've been through things Pamela Warwick can't imagine. So you'll understand what I did next. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my desk with a cold cup of coffee and an open laptop. Years of digital habits kicked in. I backed up everything: emails, maps, bylaws. I dove into the legal status of Lake Silverpine, and what I found made me laugh out loud. The lake wasn't part of Crest Haven. It was part of a federal watershed district that had been established long before any HOA ever planted its flag. Meaning Pamela had zero jurisdiction. Her little signs, her rules, her fake violations, they were nothing but paper-thin scare tactics with no legal ground. So I printed it. All of it. Official statements, highlighted jurisdiction maps, emails from the Federal Lake Authority. Then I did what Pamela never expected. I brought receipts. The next day, yellow flyers were taped to mailboxes like crime scene notices. No unapproved lake activity. All events require HOA board consent. She doubled down. She wasn't backing off. And that's when I knew this wasn't just a personal vendetta. It was a pattern. Susan Harper from 2 houses down whispered it to me when she dropped off a coffee cake as an apology. She fined me for a dying rose bush, she said. My husband passed 3 weeks before. I didn't even have time to grieve. Pamela wasn't just a nuisance. She was a tyrant. I decided to fight. I walked into the emergency HOA meeting like a man walking into a duel, with every bullet in my chamber legal, factual, and timestamped. Pamela stood at the front, her PowerPoint glowing in HOA red, protecting our community standards. She had photos of our party, cropped tight to look rowdy. No context, no sound, just blurry faces and beer cans. Neighbors, she began in that faux concern voice. We are under siege by individuals who believe rules don't apply to them. Then she looked at me, dead on. I didn't flinch. I just waited. She talked about unauthorized gatherings, disturbing the peace, and illegal use of community resources. Then I stood, my voice steady, my hand in my jacket. Let's talk about your rules, Pamela, I said, and your authority over Lake Silverpine. I pulled out the paper, federal seal, Director Hargrove's signature, official language. This letter, I said, holding it high, is from the actual governing body of Lake Silverpine, not your HOA, not your golf buddy, not your pastel clipboard. The room stilled. This lake, I continued, is federal land, and you've been pretending it's your personal fiefdom. That ends today. Pamela's face drained of color. She took a step back. That's impossible, she whispered. How did you get that? You could hear a pin drop. She's terrified of a piece of paper, Derek muttered beside me. And in that moment, everyone saw her for what she was. Not a protector of the community, but a dictator without an army. I didn't gloat. I didn't yell. I just read. Any HOA claiming jurisdiction over Lake Silverpine is in violation of federal land use policy and may be subject to legal action. Hook closed. But the war? Oh, that was just beginning. She didn't back down. After I held that federal document up like a crucifix to a vampire, I thought I'd seen the last of Pamela Warwick's reign of terror. I was wrong. Some people don't retreat. They regroup. And Pamela? She doubled down like a cornered animal, hissing with a smile, fangs behind lipstick. That same night, I saw the first ripple. I was at home, sitting on the porch with Derek, sipping a beer, feeling that odd mix of relief and caution you get after a firefight. You're still standing, but you damn well know it's not over. You think she'll come after you directly? He asked. I laughed. She already has. This was just her opening volley. Now she's embarrassed. He nodded. Then it's war. The next morning, my phone didn't stop buzzing. Emails, texts, an alert from the community bulletin. Someone, anonymous of course, had blasted out a neighborhood-wide message, concerned neighbor alert. The subject line reeked of judgment. The message, worse, allegations, lies, claims that the gathering on the lake had involved illegal substances, disruptive behavior, and possible threats to community safety. I was named, not directly but heavily implied. Certain individuals with a history of disregarding rules and community ethics. It went on, vague enough to avoid a lawsuit, specific enough for anyone with a brain to know who it meant. It was warfare through suggestion. Coward's propaganda. I knew Pamela's fingerprints were all over it. Her language had a perfume of control and fake civility. I'd seen it before on HOA letters, where she fined neighbors for mailbox fonts and grass too tall by half an inch. But this was different. This was personal. Within hours, plans were canceled. People who used to wave at me during morning walks now avoided eye contact. A neighbor I'd played poker with for 6 years texted me, "Hey, just laying low right now. Hope you understand." Understand? Yeah. I understood that fear is contagious and Pamela had just launched a full-blown outbreak. It's easy to underestimate the HOA when you're not the target. But when they point their weaponized bureaucracy at you, it's like death by paperwork. Slow, suffocating, and completely legal looking. But I don't fold under pressure. Never have. Not when my dad lost his job and I had to get 3 side hustles in college. Not when my wife left and I had to raise my son through court battles and custody hearings. And I sure as hell wasn't folding now because a woman with a clipboard and a superiority complex decided I was a threat to her little kingdom. I started documenting everything. I created folders on my drive. Tags, timestamps, screenshots. If she was gonna fight dirty, I was gonna fight smart. That night, Derek showed up with coffee and eyes that said he hadn't slept. "Been watching her place?" he said flatly. "Every evening, her husband meets with this guy in a gray suit down by the East Shore, where the barrels are." My brain clicked. Jake, the barrels. A forgotten warning resurfaced. Jake had mentioned them on the boat. Rusted, half submerged, near the tree line. No one had checked it out because we were too busy enjoying the day. But now the dots were connecting. "What do they do there?" I asked. "Talk. Point. The guy takes notes. Sometimes photographs." Derek showed me his phone. Blurry zoom shots, but clear enough to see the outlines of 3 men standing too close to something they didn't want found. Pamela's perfect hair in the frame, her stance tense. Her husband's hand over a folder. I felt it in my gut. Whatever they were doing, it wasn't legal, and she was using the HOA like a smokescreen. The next morning, I opened the door to find a petition stuck in the mailbox, typed neatly in HOA-approved font. Title: Petition to Maintain Safety Standards and Community Integrity. My name wasn't listed, but the language was unmistakable. We, the undersigned, believe that individuals who disrupt community harmony should be formally investigated and held accountable. And there were already signatures. Dozens. My stomach dropped when I saw Tom's name. Tom, who'd waved every morning. Tom, whose kid I helped when he fell off his bike last year. That betrayal stung. Later, Tom told me in hushed tones that Pamela had threatened another fine over his mailbox if he didn't cooperate. "She fined me $100 last year," he said. "I can't afford another hit." I didn't blame him. I blamed her. And I blamed the system that gave her the illusion of power. That evening, a knock at the door revealed Susan Harper, eyes darting nervously, gripping a manila envelope like it might explode. "I shouldn't be here," she whispered. "But I can't let this go on." She sat at my kitchen table and revealed her secret. She worked at First National Bank and had processed a contract last year, a $1 million deal between Pamela's husband and a waste management company. "It's about the lake," she said. "Disposal rights. The barrels. They're dumping something. It's dirty. Maybe toxic." That was it. The missing puzzle piece. Pamela wasn't just a control freak. She was running cover for an illegal operation. Every party she ruined, every kid she made cry, every absurd fine. It was all smoke to distract from the real crime, poisoning federal water for profit. I spent the next 2 days compiling everything. Every map, every email, every permit, every witness statement. I contacted the Federal Lake Authority again, this time more forceful, demanding clarity and immediate action. I wasn't polite. I was precise. The response I got wasn't just helpful, it was furious. "Pamela Warwick has no jurisdiction over Lake Silverpine," the email read, "and any HOA attempting to assert authority over federal waters will be investigated accordingly." They issued me a new permit. Signed, sealed, ironclad. And better yet, they opened a formal inquiry. I smiled when I read it. The trap was closing. But Pamela wasn't done yet. That same afternoon, Officer Powell showed up at my door with exhaustion written all over his face. "She's filed a formal complaint," he said. "Illegal use of a federal waterway. Claims you're running an unlicensed business. My boss is under pressure to escalate." I handed him my permit. He scanned it. "Looks valid," he muttered. "But I'm telling you now, get ahead of this. She's not just bluffing." And then, as if to prove his point, the next morning brought a new escalation. Pamela went on local TV, Channel 7 primetime, her voice dripping with concern as she painted me as a menace. "Some individuals," she said, "think they can ignore rules, endanger our children, and disrespect our values. I say no." I watched the interview on my phone, standing in my driveway. My hands clenched, my jaw locked. But what finally broke me wasn't her smug face on the screen. It was what I saw that afternoon. A little girl, 8 years old, standing by the lake with a fishing rod, eyes wide, tears rolling. "But Mommy said we could fish today," she whimpered. And behind her, a brand new sign, staked deep into the dirt. "Lake closed. HOA authorization required." That did it. I didn't just want to beat Pamela. I needed to destroy her system, before another kid cried, before another man got fined for his lawn, before another neighbor lost their peace. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for every damn American who's ever been told to sit down and shut up by someone who thought a title made them God. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and began crafting the email that would start the real war. I wasn't afraid. I was done being afraid. Pamela lit a match the day she called the cops on a floating party. I was about to show her what happens when you burn down your own lies. The knock on my door that morning didn't come from the HOA, a neighbor, or even the police. It came from the U.S. Department of Environmental Protection. A man in a brown windbreaker with government insignia stepped forward, badge in hand, face hard like he hadn't smiled since Clinton was president. "Mr. West," he asked, "you submitted a complaint regarding unauthorized industrial activity near Lake Silverpine?" I nodded. "Come in." I led him through the living room where Derek sat half asleep, clutching a half-empty cup of gas station coffee. The agent introduced himself as Director Hargrove. That name would stick with me. Hargrove had the tone of a man who didn't play political games, the kind who dealt in facts and consequences. "We took your submission seriously," he said, "but we don't rely on emails alone. We sent a team out last night." He paused. "What we found wasn't just unauthorized, it was criminal." My chest tightened. He pulled out a file and opened it slowly, letting the weight of the pages do the talking. "These barrels here," he said, pointing to a photo, "contain residual solvents used in industrial degreasing. Stuff that hasn't been legal to dump since 1982. My stomach turned. "They were leaking," he added flatly, "into the lake. Your lake. The one your HOA president claimed to be protecting." He didn't need to say more. I already knew. Pamela Warwick had weaponized the HOA to shield a toxic waste scheme run by her husband and his buddies in suits. What I didn't expect was the next sentence. "But here's the kicker, Mr. West." She forged communication from our office. A cease and desist letter, signed with a fabricated name, implying the federal government approved HOA authority over Lake Silverpine. My jaw clenched. She made it up? Completely. That's when Hargrove handed me a document that would change everything. A formal, federally authorized, multi-use activity permit, my name on it valid for 5 years. I wasn't just allowed to use the lake. I had the full backing of the feds to continue recreational events, monitor environmental activity, and file official reports. It was the government's way of saying, "Thank you, citizen. Now help us finish this." I looked up at him. "What now?" "Now," Hargrove said, "we let her keep talking." Pamela didn't disappoint. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for that Saturday. She sent out glossy flyers. Yes, actual printed flyers, to every house in Crest Haven, inviting residents to an urgent community discussion on safety, ethics, and enforcement. I showed up in jeans and boots, with a manila folder under one arm and a portable voice recorder in my pocket. Derek came with me, and so did Susan Harper, who looked like she hadn't slept in 2 days but had fire in her eyes. We sat near the front, quietly. Pamela stood at the podium wearing a salmon-colored blazer, her pearls practically glowing under the fluorescent lights. She smiled that practice smile, the one she probably used when convincing newcomers that HOA rules were there to build unity. "Good neighbors," she began. "We are under siege." She wasted no time. "There are individuals among us who disregard our shared values, who weaponize government channels to undermine what we've built here in Crest Haven." The irony was thick enough to choke on. "These individuals," she continued, staring directly at me, "have attracted unnecessary federal scrutiny. They've accused good people, your friends, your neighbors, of crimes they didn't commit." Murmurs filled the room. She was good. I'll give her that. She knew how to twist fear into applause. But I wasn't there to play defense. I stood slowly, calm but deliberate. "Pamela," I said, "you said these were baseless accusations?" She blinked. "That's right. And you claim no knowledge of industrial dumping?" "Of course not. This is a community, not a chemical plant." "And you're sure?" "Absolutely sure. You didn't forge a letter from the Department of Environmental Protection?" Her jaw twitched. "That accusation is outrageous." That's when I opened the folder. Hargrove's report, photographs, permit copies, and a formal cease and desist order. This one reel. This one bearing the actual signature of the Assistant Director of Environmental Compliance. I handed copies to the board members. "These are the findings of a federal investigation conducted 2 nights ago. The dumping site is real. The chemicals are banned. The damage is measurable. And the forgeries, well, the feds don't take kindly to impersonation." Pamela went pale. She reached for the mic, but Susan stood first. "I work at the bank," she said loudly. "I processed the contract for the waste company Pamela's husband signed. The payments were disguised under landscaping services." You could hear a pin drop, then a gasp, then a whisper. The room turned. Neighbors began murmuring, backing away from Pamela like she had something contagious. That's when Derek hit the play button on his phone, broadcasting a short clip. Pamela's voice, recorded during one of her meetings with her husband on the East Shore. "If Ryan keeps pushing, we bury him with rules. Let him drown in fines. Nobody cares about the truth. Just control the story." Her voice, crystal clear. That was the breaking point. One of the board members, Old Harold, a Navy vet who rarely spoke at meetings, stood up and said simply, "She's done." The crowd began to move, some toward the door, some toward Pamela. But she was frozen. Finally, she whispered, "This is slander." "No," I said calmly. "This is accountability." The next day, Pamela's home was searched under a federal warrant. Her husband was detained. The barrels were hauled out of the lake under EPA supervision. News vans showed up within hours, and by nightfall, Channel 7 had flipped their script, now portraying Pamela not as a vigilant protector, but as a corrupt tyrant masking crime with community buzzwords. My inbox exploded. Thank you messages, apologies, old friends coming back around. Tom, the neighbor who'd signed the petition under pressure, brought me a 6-pack and said, "We should have believed you sooner." I didn't need the apology, but I appreciated the gesture. Susan was offered whistleblower protection. Derek was asked to join the new oversight committee. And me? I finally went back to the lake. Same boat, same music. But this time, something felt different. I wasn't just a guy with a grill and a cooler full of beer. I was the reason that lake was still clean, still ours. And as I leaned back in the captain's chair, feeling the breeze whip across the water, I remembered what Hargrove told me before he left town. People like Pamela always think the rules are for everyone else, until someone shows them they're not above the law. Damn right. Let that be the lesson. You don't beat tyrants with noise. You beat them with facts, patience, and an unshakable belief in your right to exist in peace. That's the American way. By the time Thursday morning rolled around, I'd nearly convinced myself the worst had passed. Pamela was reeling. The federal agents were active. The barrels were being hauled away by men in hazmat suits who didn't bother smiling, and neighbors were cautiously starting to believe they hadn't been crazy for years. But there's something you learn when you've lived long enough. Bullies don't fold easy, and narcissists don't go quietly. They don't just lose, they metastasize, shift form, hide behind process, behind loopholes, behind whatever system is easiest to twist into a weapon. And Pamela Warwick had one last poison dart left in her manicured claws. The mailman didn't even make eye contact when he dropped off the envelope. Thick, certified, with a return address from a law firm I didn't recognize. I opened it with a steak knife at the kitchen counter, the paper slicing my thumb in the process. That felt appropriate. Inside was a formal cease and desist letter. Pamela was suing me for defamation, libel, willful interference with contractual agreements, and, my personal favorite, intentional emotional sabotage. Her lawyer had a flair for melodrama. Apparently, I'd waged a campaign of psychological terror, against a community volunteer whose only goal was preservation and cohesion. I laughed out loud, the sound echoing in the empty kitchen. Derek, who had spent the night on my couch again, groaned from the living room. That from her lawyer? Yup, I replied. Emotional sabotage. I guess exposing illegal toxic dumping counts now. He stood up, stretched, and grabbed the envelope. Do they not realize we have her on tape? With timestamps, government records, eyewitnesses. They don't care, I said. It's not about winning. It's about drowning me in paperwork and fear. It's a scare tactic. And it worked briefly. I felt the panic creep up like it did when I got called to the principal's office in 9th grade. That irrational fear that even if you're right, someone in a tie might still ruin your life just because they can. But then my phone buzzed. Susan. She'd received the same letter. So had Tom. And Cheryl from the cul-de-sac. For residents, for lawsuits, all with the same language, the same threat. Shut up, stay down, or pay. That night, I did what Pamela didn't expect. I hosted a backyard potluck. Sent out texts, called neighbors, even printed a few flyers like she used to. No HOA business, I wrote. Just good food and truth-telling. 23 people showed up. A few brought dishes. Most brought stories. One by one, they told their own versions of the same thing. Fines for mailbox paint, threats over Halloween decorations, mysterious anonymous complaints that only Pamela ever followed up on. It was like unlocking a vault of collective trauma. The most heartbreaking came from Glenn, a Vietnam vet who rarely left his porch. He'd been fined $600 for parking his daughter's car in his driveway while she visited for a weekend. Pamela claimed the vehicle violated aesthetic cohesion. Glenn hadn't contested it. Too tired, too proud, too beat down. But now his voice cracked. She made me feel like a trespasser in my own home, he said, eyes glassy. I stood up then, holding the lawsuit letter in one hand and my beer in the other. She wants us scared, wants us scattered, wants us thinking we're alone. But look around. You're not alone. Not anymore. I saw it in their faces, that flicker, that ember of something that had been extinguished too long. And just like that, Pamela's lawsuit had backfired. She didn't divide us. She galvanized us. The next morning, Susan and I filed a countersuit. Our lawyer, a pit bull of a woman named Teresa Lane, didn't bother with niceties. We'll bury her in affidavits, she said flatly. You want justice? Get ready for war. The legal counteroffensive was only one part of it. We needed public opinion. And that's where Derek's college roommate came in. A documentary filmmaker who owed Derek a favor and had a knack for storytelling. Within days, we had cameras rolling. Not some big budget expose, but raw human truth. Glenn on his porch. Susan with her stack of fake fines. Me standing by the lake. The wind lifting my permit like a flag. We didn't smear Pamela, we let her record do the talking. The filmmaker interviewed the fisherman she'd tried to jail. He talked about how she'd confiscated his gear and screamed that he was violating aquatic harmony. That was actually in the HOA manual. Pamela had added it herself. The footage was gold. When we posted the documentary teaser online, it blew up fast. Local Facebook groups, then regional news. By Sunday, it had reached 40,000 views and counting. That same evening, my motion-activated porch cam pinged. A shadow moved near my mailbox. Derek and I watched from the upstairs window as someone. Slim build, hoodie, too graceful to be a teenager, shoved something inside. When they vanished, I went down and opened the box. A USB drive. No note, no label, just a cheap plastic stick warm from palm heat. Against Derek's objections, I plugged it into an air-gapped laptop. Paranoia wasn't just for conspiracy theorists anymore. The files were folders of emails, dozens, between Pamela, her husband, and someone named BH discussing site dumping schedules, payment structures, and fake inspection reports. One email chilled my blood. Client expects barrels removed by October 15th. HOA noise complaints have bought us time. No more whistleblowers. Derek stared at the screen. This is prison time, man. If it's real, I said. But deep down, I knew it was. Every word reeked of the same smug confidence Pamela had wielded at every HOA meeting. She thought she was untouchable. By Tuesday, the footage was turned over to federal authorities. I watched Powell's face as he reviewed the data, his mouth flattening into a grim line. "They're done," he muttered. "Done and cooked." But that didn't mean Pamela wasn't going to make one last move. Wednesday night, the HOA board convened for an emergency vote. Rumor was, Pamela was going to make a case to expel me and Susan for ongoing disruption and legal hostility. That's the phrase she used in her resolution. We arrived with backup, dozens of neighbors who'd finally had enough. Glenn, Tom, Cheryl, even the shy high school teacher from down the block who once got fined for not using HOA-approved mulch. Pamela stood at the front, face hard, hair lacquered in place, resolution in hand. "This board must act," she declared, "or risk the collapse of everything we've built." That's when Teresa Lane stepped forward, pulled a copy of our federal report from her briefcase, and dropped it on the table with a satisfying slap. "Collapse already happened, Ms. Warwick. You just didn't notice while you were busy cashing checks." What followed wasn't a debate. It was a reckoning. One board member after another read their resignations into the mic. "I won't be part of this anymore," one said. "We were wrong," another admitted. The final blow came from Powell, who had been observing from the back. "This meeting is no longer under HOA jurisdiction," he announced. "It is now part of a federal investigation. Pamela Warwick, you are under arrest for fraud, forgery, environmental crimes, and obstruction of justice." The room exploded. Cameras, gasps, even a slow clap from Glenn. Pamela's mouth moved, but no words came out. Powell stepped forward. "Let's go," he said, snapping cuffs around her wrists. The last thing I saw before she disappeared behind the squad car door was the look in her eyes. Not rage, not defiance, just fear. The kind that comes when you realize your empire was built on sand. And the tide just came in. The lake was quiet again, the way it used to be before the signs went up and the rules turned neighbors into suspects. A breeze cut across the water, cool and steady, the kind that reminds you what peace actually feels like. I stood near the shoreline, boots in the wet sand, eyes watching a little girl cast a fishing line with her grandfather. No signs, no warnings, just laughter and still water. That little girl had cried weeks earlier when Pamela Warwick staked a HOA-authorized use-only sign where her dreams used to sit. Now, the only sign left said, "Public federal waters protected by law." The irony still tasted sweet. Pamela was gone, booked, processed, and awaiting federal charges that stacked like bricks. Fraud, forgery, environmental violations, obstruction of justice, and attempted coercion of public officials. Her husband, indicted separately for corporate dumping and racketeering. Their assets were frozen. Their HOA thrones turned to dust. Susan took over as interim HOA president, though by now most of us didn't want much to do with that acronym. She had no interest in power, only in fixing what had been broken. First thing she did? Return every dollar the HOA had wrongfully fined, starting with the veterans and the widows. Glenn got his $600 back with an apology letter. He burned the letter, but kept the check. Derek was appointed to lead a new community review board, independent, neighbor-elected, and fully transparent. They didn't meet in secret or send veiled emails. Their meetings were held on the lakeside porch of the community center, with folding chairs, lemonade, and open doors. I didn't take a formal role despite the suggestions. I didn't need a title. I had my boat, my permit, and my name cleared. That was enough. The documentary kept climbing. Within 2 months, it had been picked up by a national outlet, retitled "The Lake They Tried to Steal." They interviewed Glenn again, this time in his dress blues. They asked Susan about what it felt like to flip from fear to truth. And they asked me one final question on camera. "What would you say to someone living under a petty tyrant in a place just like this?" I remember leaning forward, eyes steady, hands clasped. Document everything. Ask the uncomfortable questions. And when they tell you to be quiet, get louder. It wasn't some cinematic mic drop. It was just the truth. A week after the final footage aired, I got a letter in the mail from Director Hargrove. Not a government memo, not a form, just a handwritten note. He thanked me for doing what too many people are too tired or too afraid to do: push back. He told me he kept a copy of the permit in his own files now, as a reminder that ordinary citizens still hold the line when the system forgets how. I pinned that note above my workbench. But Pamela, she wasn't quite finished. Word came down that she tried to organize a prison block council, complete with bylaws and a chore schedule. You'd think I was making it up, but no, some people are built to control even when all they have left is a concrete cell and a captive audience. She tried to pull the same act with the inmates that she had with us. Setting rules, manipulating fears, creating little pockets of obedience. It didn't work. Someone leaked the story to a national blog, and soon she became a punchline. Late-night shows ran with it. HOA Karen starts prison neighborhood watch. I laughed harder than I should have. The town shifted. Slowly, then all at once. Halloween came with more decorations than we'd seen in years. No citations. No complaints. Just kids in costumes and neighbors trading candy on porches. A few weeks later, Susan approved the removal of 8 unnecessary HOA restrictions. Among them, height limits on garden gnomes, approved mailbox fonts, and noise levels during sunrise fishing. That last one had always made me shake my head. No one complained about chainsaws, but God forbid your reel squeaked at 5:45 a.m. One Saturday morning, I took the pontoon out with Derek and Glenn. We cracked open beers before the engine even started. The sun barely up, and for a long time none of us spoke. Just the sound of the water slapping gently against the hull, the occasional rustle of a heron lifting off. Glenn finally broke the silence. "Didn't think we'd win," he said. "I figured you'd just get fined into the grave." I looked at him, then out over the lake. "So did I admitted. But something happens when people realize the fear isn't permanent." Derek nodded. "Once the illusion's gone, they've got nothing left." We stopped near the east shore. The barrels were long gone, but the soil was still marked with bright orange tape and hazard flags. The EPA said the lake would be monitored for 5 years. I didn't mind. I liked the idea that someone official would keep an eye on things for once. Just before we headed in, a younger guy on a kayak paddled up. I didn't recognize him. Maybe late 30s. Said his family had just moved in from out of state. He'd watched the documentary. Said he couldn't believe all that had happened in a neighborhood like this. I smiled. "It always starts small," I told him. "A letter, a fine, a rule that doesn't feel right. Then one day you look around and realize the rules are the whole world. Unless you push back." He nodded slowly, then paddled off, probably thinking we were just a bunch of old men with too many stories. Maybe we were, but those stories mattered. That lake had nearly been stolen. The laughter, the freedom, the long afternoons and the sizzle of a grill, all almost lost to one person's greed dressed up as order. I still keep the original letter from Pamela. The one she wrote me years ago, fining me $50 for inappropriate flag display when I hung an American flag too low on my porch. I frame it next to the federal permit now, side by side. A before and after. A warning and a weapon. There's power in keeping receipts. Not just paper ones. The real kind, the lived kind. The kind that tell you you're not crazy, not overreacting, not alone. If you're reading this, if you're over 60 and tired of being told to sit still and obey by people who haven't lived half of what you have, don't. Stand up. Push back. Take your lake back. Your porch. Your peace. Your voice. Because the truth is, they only win if you stay silent. And I can tell you, from the shore of a lake we saved, there's no better sound than silence broken by freedom.